Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. My name is Miles, better known as Mr. Most Days Off, and I am back once again to talk about The Simpsons. We've got a couple of classic episodes for you today. First off, Itchy and Scratchy and Marge, and then we're going to dive into Bart Gets Hit by a Car. But before we get to those, let me introduce to you, your co-host with the most, Richie the WIzKid. How are you today, Rich?
Good morrow, everybody. Welcome back to our lovely and fun, fantastic show. We got a couple of really good episodes today, I feel like. So we're going to get right into it. I'll throw it back to you, the man, the myth, the Michelangelo's David. And yes, that is a joke about your penis. It is Mr. Most Days Off.
I also have a famous penis? Is that what you're trying to imply?
Or you have something that needs to be covered up by all the parents of Springfield.
Fair enough, fair enough. So
because it's so small.
Nice. I was waiting for that part. So, if you don't know already, we are talking about Itchy and Scratchy and Marge today. The episode debuted on December 20th of 1990. It's our last episode we're going to have for the year 1990, so get ready to say goodbye, but don't worry, 1991 was pretty cool too. We get started with the chalk gag. It is, I will not pledge allegiance to Bart, which I think is kind of funny because it kind of plays into what we've talked about a little bit with The Simpsons in that Bart comes off as an idiot, but he is not. He's the type of dude that would fucking have, like, he could easily become Hitler. I'm just saying. I don't think he's as evil as Hitler, but he's got the type of personality and charm that people might pledge allegiance to him at certain points in his life.
Well, I think the reason he doesn't do that is going to come into play in the next episode.
For sure, absolutely. We also have the couch gag, and also this kind of goes along with another one of our theories we've been talking about. In this couch gag, all of the Simpsons come in, and the couch is missing. I'll point out that all of the adults and older children just look around confused and befuddled. However, Maggie is just like, whatever, and turns around and watches television, because she is the smartest Simpson.
And that also plays into this exact episode.
Yeah, that's true. We get our first appearance of Sideshow Mel in this one. We'll talk about it just a little bit later. There's no lines yet, and it's only brief, but it does technically count as a first appearance. So, this episode starts out with Marge doing a little bit of cooking and making Homer's favorite dish, her patented pork chops. And Homer decides he's feeling loving, and he's gonna build her a spice rack.
Rawr.
He gets out to the garage full of tools he never uses.
Oh, I love that. The hammer still has the sales tag on it.
Then the catalyst for the entire episode happens, and one of the coolest parody scenes ever. Maggie hits Homer over the head with a mallet, but it's shot just like the movie Psycho, complete with the music and a bucket of red paint spilling down the drain next to Homer. Really, really fun scene.
Yes, it is. Which, again, how did Maggie get up that high on the shelf? How did she hold a mallet up, a la using the Force or wizard powers? And then all of a sudden, at the end of that scene, after she hits him, she's on the ground like she jumped off the shelf and is walking back into the house. So, again, we've got another instance. Is she a Muggle-born witch? Is she a Jedi Master? I don't know, but either way, she is getting...
You decide!
She's getting crazier and crazier in every episode, almost.
Yeah, dude. I'm really glad Andy brought that up. I don't know. I'm sure we would have gotten to that at some point ourselves, but the fact that he planted that seed so early back in season 1, and at least every podcast episode so far, that has come up at least once or twice, so... really fun theory to think about as you're watching through The Simpsons. Maggie's definitely got some sort of magical power.
I'm starting to get kind of mad at Andy because I feel like he almost incepted this idea into us, just like Inception, and I'm kind of mad about that because it's consuming my life at the moment.
Well, he's going to be back in 2 weeks, so you can air your grievances at him, and I'm sure we'll have some time to debate Muggle-born witch versus Jedi Master.
Either way, still the most adept Simpson of all.
Absolutely. So this act of random violence from Maggie has Marge racking her brain trying to figure out what could have possibly caused this. And while they're sitting there scratching their heads taking care of Homer on the couch, none other than Itchy and Scratchy come on. And of course, this episode just so happens to have them repeatedly hitting each other over the head with a mallet. So didn't even really take much of an effort for Marge to connect the dots on this one.
And then you also have the scene after that where she's not quite sure, and then Itchy's stabbing Scratchy with a kitchen knife, and Marge looks at Maggie, and Maggie picks up a pencil and is looking at Homer like she's gonna stab him with the pencil.
I love the way they do the classic bit there where Scratchy's midsection is like snaking around dodging the knife. That cracks me up. Oh, hey, that while we're talking about Itchy and Scratchy, I learned a fun little trick today while I was reading on the internet. Have you ever had trouble keeping straight in your mind which one is Itchy and which one is Scratchy?
I really haven't.
The writers of the show intentionally have the word cat in Scratchy. So if you ever forget on Simpsons trivia night because you've had one too many, the word cat is in the word Scratchy. Just a little, yeah, just a little bit of a fun fact there for you. I thought that was kind of cool, and I don't think that I've ever personally been in a situation where I was like, oh shit, which one's the cat and which one's the mouse. I just think of them as a duo. So, you get, not really pertinent.
You get Poochie down the line, which obviously plays into that a little bit as well.
Yeah, there you go. Anyway, moving back into the episode, Marge has decided that they're done watching violent programming in their house, at least. She's upset. Lisa protests with Mom, if you take away television, we'll grow up without a sense of humor and become robots, which gets Bart contemplating what type of robots.
I found that both of these episodes today had numerous jokes in the episodes that you have to be paying attention to catch, where it's all about the timing and the delivery of the joke, which it always is, but this is like the Simpsons are getting into full gear now, where they've hit the point where you can watch the episodes so many times and still catch things you didn't see before.
Yeah, I agree. They are finding their stride in that way, where there's a lot more underground humor to it.
Oh, I like that term for the Halloween episode. Well, never mind, we're weeks ahead, but yeah, the Halloween theme.
Yeah, there you go. We are recording this one on Halloween. That's true. So there's another funny moment where Homer is lying on the couch. Marge just sent the kids away, and then Marge turns on Itchy and Scratchy herself so she could take notes. But Homer is basically complaining, like, "What do you mean you're going to watch the show after you just banned it?" And then as Marge is watching, she's seeing all this violent acts, and she says out loud, "What kind of person would think this is funny?" And right at that moment, Homer starts cracking up at the episode. Like, just really good stuff there.
Well, what I love is the kids are sent out of the house, and what do? They do what every kid did when I was growing up, which I was always allowed to watch The Simpsons. So when all my friends couldn't, they would come over to my house to watch The Simpsons with me. And that's when you get Bart and Lisa going to their friends' houses so they can still catch Itchy and Scratchy. And I just love that. It's so true.
My parents had really weird, ever once in a while, like they would have some show that I just was not allowed to watch. So there's only a handful of them throughout my lifetime that I had to do that. But like specifically, Beavis and Butthead was one that like my dad just hated with a passion. He's like, that show's gonna rot your brain, make you an idiot. And then also, which this is somewhat ironic just based on my like love for it now, but like when South Park first aired, well, first of all, we just didn't have cable at that time. I didn't have Comedy Central, so it wasn't an option regardless. But once I did get Comedy Central in the house, like there, for whatever reason, right off the bat, my dad was just like, no, you can't do that. But for the most part, like ever since I was even like a little kid, I was able to watch like R-rated movies. Like for almost everything was totally cool. But Beavis and Butthead and South Park were like the thing that crossed the line for some reason. Super strange.
South Park was like The Simpsons for me. My dad watched it with me the first few times we watched it, and he loved it as much as I did. So I think initially he laughed more at South Park than I did. It was the dodgeball episode I remember was the first one we saw, and it was actually right after it aired, I believe, which I think is the season 2 or the end of season 1. And we were at my grandmother's house in Colorado, and she had Comedy Central, so we were going to go to bed one night and it was on, so we watched like 2 back-to-back episodes, I think, and laughed our asses off. And then after that we came back home and all of a sudden we had Comedy Central.
Well, that's a good reason to sign up for the network. I think a lot of people actually probably signed up for Comedy Central because of South Park, if we're all being honest with ourselves.
Absolutely.
So Marge takes her notes and she decides that she wants to do something about it, so she writes a letter to the network, which is largely ignored. And what is she called? A wackadoodle? She's called something of that nature.
Screwball, I think.
A screwball, there you go. She's told that one screwball won't be able to do anything, and she essentially decides she's going to prove them wrong. She starts picketing. At first, it's just her and her family that are clearly there against their will. But eventually, the Reverend's wife comes along. Mrs. Lovejoy comes along, and she obviously, wants to crusade against everything. So she joins the fight, and the numbers keep growing and growing. I know I saw Flanders there. I know I saw Reverend Lovejoy. I'm sure there was a few more familiar faces, a lot of unfamiliar faces in the crowd. But this one little screwball was bringing her message to these bigwigs. They actually ended up having a protest at the Krusty the Clown show. And that's actually where we did briefly meet Sideshow Mel, where he had his little slide whistle. He'll actually become a little bit more fleshed out later too, but this was technically his first appearance.
Well, what I like too is the previous scene when Marge was writing the letters and sending them to Roger Myers Jr. and Krusty. Keeping up with continuity, Krusty can't read Marge's letter because we learned in Krusty Gets Busted that he doesn't know how to read. So good job, Simpsons, keeping that continuity going without him even saying anything in that scene. He just looks at the letter upside down.
That was really fucking cool. You're right. Total throwback.
And we also got the phone call that I love where Homer had to call in. He had to miss work for a few days because Maggie hit him in the head with a mallet. And he literally says, "You heard me, I won't be in for the rest of the week." And then he's listening in on the phone and he goes, "I told you, my baby beat me up." And then he goes, "Oh, it's not the worst excuse I've ever thought up." Just the way he says, "My baby beat me up," just cracks me up so much.
That was really good. I also really appreciate right after that when they're dealing with the growing protest. They're in the big meeting room at the table and they're coming up with ways that they can deal with Marge. And the first suggestions are all like cartoon violent ways. They're like, we could stuff her head full of dynamite. We could come at her with machete. Like, they're like saying things that Itchy and Scratchy would actually do to each other. And I just thought it was funny that this was in the board meeting.
Well, I want to propose an idea for you here. Getting back to Homer for just a split second. Is Homer Bruce Willis from the movie Unbreakable? Because in the very last episode, Homer suffered numerous massive injuries repeatedly. And in the beginning of this episode, he is completely fine. Now, I understand it's a cartoon show, so you got to get him back to square one. But injuries that he suffered in the last episode would probably debilitate him for quite some time. Yet he's able to get hit in the head with the mallet, and even throughout this episode, they keep the bandage on for a little while, but he's out of it pretty quick.
While you're on that wormhole train of thought, I also want to think about the fact that what fucking seasons are they in up there in Oregon? Because it was Thanksgiving 2 weeks ago, and then they had Bart jumping the Springfield Gorge on a beautiful sunny day. This episode, we see all the Simpsons outside protesting and dressed in regular street attire. No, like, big jackets or anything like that. And then in the episode we're going to talk about here shortly, we have Bart Simpson skateboarding on a beautiful Springfield day. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's like the movie 500 Days of Summer. The Simpsons doesn't play chronologically. It plays out of order.
There you go. Yeah, so that we have no idea how long ago or if if Homer's injuries have even happened yet.
There you go. So the next time you watch 500 Days of Summer, what should you say?
Simpsons did it, baby.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So we get to the writer's solution, or actually one clever cartoonist solution of how they should deal with Marge. The family is sitting down to watch the Itchy and Scratchy show, and a squirrel with a very familiar haircut and a very annoying voice comes in and tells the cat and mouse they should basically quit what they are doing, which I believe was hitting each other back and forth with a baseball bat.
Baseball theme today, ladies and gentlemen.
They both decide to, in turn, take a whack at the annoying squirrel, and they knock her out of the ballpark.
I think it was just her head, too.
Yeah, I think it was.
And that's one of the funniest lines of the episode to me, because Homer starts laughing and he says, "Take that, you dumb squirrel." And it's clearly Marge.
And right after that, he says, where do they get their ideas from?
Yeah.
Yeah. I really enjoyed that too, for sure. So those protest letters are piling up. And one of the funniest ones to me, or one of the ones that he reads out, I think it was the only one he read out loud actually, but it made me crack up. The letter read, "I will no longer watch your show, I will no longer buy your product, and I will no longer break if I see you crossing the street." And it's just like, shit.
Which is funny in itself because all the people are, I just thought about this, all the people are protesting violence. and they literally, the people protesting violence say they're going to do something violent to him. I never even caught that till just now.
Yeah,
Oh
that's
my
kind of
gosh.
like the whole for the guy who likes themes. That's basically the theme of this episode.
Yeah. That's again, like we keep talking about. You can rewatch these episodes and catch things that you didn't even notice before.
For sure. Yeah. So Marge gets invited onto a late night talk show panel, and they
I think it's called Dateline. It's
immediately
Dateline, isn't it?
was it Dateline? I didn't catch that part. It's hosted by Kent Brockman. I know that much. And they basically have Marge on with the studio exec, with Dr. Marvin Monroe, and with Krusty the Clown himself. And they just totally freaking steamroll Marge. They don't give her any time to talk. They instantly start talking about how her points are wrong, and even have an acclaimed psychiatrist back all the way live from Vienna. I don't know. I guess he's on vacation was the whole point of that. But he's live in Vienna talking in Dr. Marvin Monroe and explaining why Marge is basically just being a big old whiny baby.
Yeah, didn't he just say it's because of some kind of sexism or something like he basically steamrolls her, calling out the fact that she's just a woman or something like that, which would not fly at all today, but that's
pretty much.
That's kind of the joke, I guess, so to speak. The thing I loved is Roger Meyer Jr.'s little speech he gives about violence, where he's like, I did some digging. Did you know violence existed before cartoons? And he references the Crusades.
And then Ken Brockman's like, wait. So you're saying all of these things happened before animation even existed?
Yeah, exactly. And that whole little exchange, I couldn't believe it. It was just cracking me up. Just over and over with the Crusades.
Yeah, that was really good. That was good. The revolt more or less works. They don't know how to deal with the violence. They're losing viewership because of Marge's protest, so they decide to change the show. And they call Marge to ask her what she thinks, and we get Marge's version of Itchy and Scratchy, and it fucking sucks. It's love, 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 share, share, share. To be fair, Maggie does imitate that as well. She brings they sit on a porch and they share lemonade with each other during the cartoon, and Maggie watches this and then gives her dad a glass of lemonade. Once again, complete with that psycho music, so it was really, really funny moment. And all of the kids basically say, fuck this, we're done with cartoons, and they go outside, and there's this great, great moment, this whole montage of a scene where it's beautiful orchestra music playing as the children are all playing outside together in harmony. Hell, Nelson is even whitewashing a fence, sort of Tom Sawyer style.
Absolutely.
And this was just a really cool moment. Something was actually brought up here. Most of the writers on this show are opposed to censorship, but they all wanted to make sure, everybody involved in the project wanted to make sure that they did not take a bias during the episode. So they tried really hard not to let their bias show and to fairly represent both sides. And this scene was to some degree a reflection of that, because there is an argument that, yeah, their shows are good and whatnot, and they want people to watch them. But maybe if people weren't watching them, they might be doing better things with their time. It brings up this whole interesting philosophical question, and I respect the fact that even though they all have a bias to promote, they opted to try not to for the sake of this show.
I actually really liked the scene with the orchestra music playing. I actually wrote down complex issue on this, and the note I wrote was the scene, along with what you were saying, is about, do we have a craving or a need for violence and mayhem? Or as juxtaposed with, we need kids to go outside and actually be outside and away from the TV every now and then. And I think there needs to be some kind of violence there. And on top of the craving for violence and stuff, is it that we have a craving for violence? Or is it just that we need something to distract us, whether it be the TV itself or going outside and just... And once the kids go outside, they're being more respectful, they're being nice to their parents, they're cleaning their plates. So, I mean, it is a very touchy situation, because you do have to find the middle ground somewhere in there where you have a little bit of both. At least that's how I believe.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, there's people that argue that watching violent acts on television and movies helps us as humans to kind of move through some of our aggression issues. And I'm not saying that if you don't watch violent movies, you're not going to go out and stab somebody, but there's enough, everybody knows the side of oh my God, if you watch a violent movie, you're probably going to murder somebody. But there's actually the counter argument that some psychiatrists actually believe that watching these things help us kind of purge them from our system, which, kind of plays into that whole movie concept too. But
Yep.
that's the whole idea. And I mean, I'm not claiming to promote either side. I don't really care fucking what you do, to be honest. I like violent movies, and I've yet to kill anyone that you know about.
Well, and Maggie is a Muggle-born witch / Jedi master, so she emulates what she sees on TV, whereas other babies aren't going to be able to do that. And although the ideas might be in their head, when Maggie's old enough, first of all, that's why you don't show young kids movies like that. You have to wait until you think they're an appropriate age. But like my father talked to me all the time. The first time I saw nudity, he knew that it was going to be in the movie. I think he'd seen the movie before, and he talked to me about it. After we saw it, he talked to me and explained what was going on, and my parents did that with violence as well. I mean, it has to be an open conversation with your children. Again, I'm not a parent and I'm not married, so I can't speak for everybody, but I'm just saying that's how it was done with me, and it worked fine. I've never had the urge to slit somebody's throat open.
Yeah, well, I'd be lying if I said that. I've totally had the urge to slit a few people's throats open, but I've also got the willpower to not to, because, of, like, morals and shit.
Yeah, exactly.
But, man, you cut me off in traffic, and... Anyway. So, your boy James L. Brooks, who, I say your boy, I know you've been a fan of his so far. I also think that he has been one of the driving forces behind the success of this show, without a doubt. Some of the key moments we've learned throughout the first season and a half now of The Simpsons is that James L. Brooks is a badass and really knew that they had something on their hands with The Simpsons, and he fought really hard to make sure that it got to where it is today. He deserves a lot of respect. He also fought really hard so that montage scene would end this episode, and he was overruled by the other writers. What do you think about that?
So he wanted this to end with them not watching TV anymore.
He wanted this to end with the scene as it is, basically, with the children playing outside with the orchestra music and not watching television.
Well, the only thing I would say to that is I assume it plays into him. I don't know if he's a parent or not. I don't know that a whole lot about his personal life, but I would assume it would have to do something with that, and that maybe he felt that either he felt that way about it, or he wanted to show how if you take too strong of a stance one way, you can actually eliminate the other side without any, feelings towards that other side, which I think is kind of wrong in a way.
I definitely don't think he was on the side of censorship. I think he just really, really liked this scene, would be my interpretation of what I read. But again, I have not interviewed anybody involved. I've only read notes of their conversation and dispute about this episode. It wasn't like a heated dispute. It was just he was for the stance of ending here, and the rest of the writers wanted to go with the ending that we're going to talk about here shortly.
Which I actually like the way this episode ends. I still have one big thing to talk about in this episode that I think...
Yeah, we already said we'd be talking about my penis on this show. Thanks.
Oh, but
regardless
that was
of that,
a short joke,
I agree in this
gentlemen.
case that James L. Brooks, while a champion of this show, I think he was wrong here, because I think the ending that we got was really, really good.
Yeah.
And I think this scene was great. Don't get me wrong. I think it was a fantastic scene. But going back to, as we've talked about too, it would have been really awkward in a sense, because it wouldn't have reset the Simpsons universe by the end of the episode. And that's something that typically needs to happen to make things make sense. Again, the exception being really the Treehouse of Horrors, they can pretty much do whatever they want, but for an everyday episode, they don't really usually leave it in any sort of situation that can't be back to square one.
Well, and also Itchy and Scratchy become such big side characters in the whole series that you metaphorically kill them here the first time they've made a prominent factor into the episode. Then what are you going to do years down the road when you need those characters back? Like, oh my god, can you imagine not having Itchy and Scratchy land? That's one of my favorite episodes.
That's one of the best episodes. No, that would, and they're I mean, the Itchy and Scratchy movie episode is one of my favorite episodes too.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Yeah. That one was, I remember watching that one as a kid, and I felt so bad for Bart, because that would literally be like the worst thing you could do to me, would be like to not let us go see one of the movies we were really excited about. Like, that would just kill me, man. And I realize that's like total first world problems, because I've got food and like a roof over my head pretty much all the time, but like in my world it would just like come crashing down if I wasn't able to see Star Wars when it opened.
Yeah, but that's the metaphor of The Simpsons, though, man. They're the typical American family, by other country standards at least.
For sure. But yeah, let's save that talk for that episode. In this episode, the protest has been successful, and Marge is basically the face of protesting in Springfield. So much so that when they decide to take Michelangelo's David across the United States on tour, and one of their stops is going to be in none other than Springfield, all of the protesters that Marge rallied with earlier are now up in arms about the fact that David's dick is going to be on display for all of their children. They show up at Marge's door and want her to come lead their protest to keep Michelangelo covered or out of the museum.
Put some pants on him.
To put some pants on him, there you go.
Which, for those who don't know, if you haven't figured it out, Michelangelo's David, obviously a statue with a penis. We should have clarified that from the beginning, in case you didn't know.
Yeah, most people are probably aware, but if you don't know Michelangelo's David, go just Google it real quick. It's a very, very famous statue, and something that typically religious folk tend to get up in arms about is the fact that, and let me rephrase that actually, specifically American religious people, because Americans tend to be really, really uncomfortable and uppity about nudity. Well, this was a statue that is in real form. I mean, it's got like an actual like human penis on it, and it is what it is. It's not covered with a fig leaf. It's just out there on display, as was the way of the times of his place in Italy, I believe, right?
That sounds good to me. I was just going to say,
let's
is
go
this
with
the
that.
first cartoon penis ever drawn?
No way. I don't think so. But, I mean, I can't come up with one that was
It's
before
1990, so I don't know.
I mean, definitely not the first cartoon penis that was drawn, because that's been happening since like writing utensils were available.
Okay, the first nationally televised.
But the first one
cartoon
aired
penis,
on television. I know what you're saying. I just wanted to make sure that it was very clear that people have definitely been drawing dicks up until this point. That's not even
Jonah
up
Hill
for
and
debate.
Superbad was cartooning penises left and right back whenever they were kids in that movie.
That's true. But yeah, so Marge is like, no, I think Michelangelo's David is fucking beautiful, and it's a national or international piece of history. It's art, and I like it. I don't want to protest that. The women, of course, are appalled, and I think it was Reverend Lovejoy. No, it was Mrs. Lovejoy actually said, "See, I told you she was soft on frontal nudity."
I love the last few scenes here, which, you know, it's hard to go against James L. Brooks, but I'm glad they had these scenes in here, because this brings up a very big issue, I think, that's always been around in this country, which is the whole sex versus violence thing. And this one's kind of opposite, because most of the time, as Americans, we're okay with violence, but sex is where we draw the line. Well, Marge was not okay with the violence, and she's actually okay with the sex aspect of it, which I found very odd, which they actually point out when she's talking about it, and that's kind of what kills her attack on Itchy and Scratchy, where how can you be against one and for the other, which, let's be honest, people have different views on different things, so it's totally okay. But I did find it odd that she was okay with this, but that the violence is where she drew the line, because again, it goes back to, if you can explain it to your children and let them, you know, determine it for themselves, but give them the guidelines to do it, then you can make everything okay to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. And I do want to clarify on something you said. I don't think that you meant it this way, but I think it could be perceived this way, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this isn't an issue of sex. This is what people make out to be sex. This is just the human form. It's natural. It's nudity. But the issue is violence versus sex, because people take it to that point when in reality there is no sex here. This isn't an act of sex. This is an act of art. And I think that's the bigger issue that we have in the United States, is that people try to spread labels of nudity, or take things like art and nudity, or even just, you know, people breastfeeding and shit, and they try to make that acts of sex when really they're completely separate things.
Yeah. The reason I was labeling it like that is because that's the way we talk about it in our society, is where it's all.
And that's the problem, Richie. We're enabling them.
Well, when I word it that way, people know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But no.
Yeah, like
exactly
I didn't
right.
think you meant it that way.
I did a monologue and a play about this once, where, you know, it's called art in one country, but in America it's called pornography. And what's the real argument with that? And I'm not talking about pornos in general. I'm talking about things like Michelangelo's
Yeah, dude, there's
David.
something beautiful about a chick with like 3 dicks in her. I totally agree.
And now you railroaded the conversation in the wrong direction.
No, man, it was art.
Well, for some people it is, and it's their way of living, but that's a whole other conversation.
For sure. They did have Marge back on the talk show again, the same one that she was railroaded on earlier, and I really liked it because they basically assumed that she was on the side against David.
Yeah.
And she was, no, I'm for it. And they're like, wait, aren't you Marge Simpson the wacko? And they got this really great point from Marge here. One of my favorite lines, just a really, really well-made point by Marge, where she's asked about, being the one person who made a difference. And she basically said, I think it's important to know that one person can make a difference. But most of the time, we probably shouldn't. And I mean, that sounds a little bit negative to some extent, but I mean, she's right in the sense that realistically, Marge went on this crusade from the get-go because she was offended. Now, she had the Jedi Master baby incident too, but Marge represented the side of America that was offended because all the people that were protesting with her, again, there's a lot of skull caps I noticed in the crowd, and apparently a lot of babies imitating, but the whole point in my mind is you don't go after television, you take your kid away from television that's not appropriate for them, because babies shouldn't be watching people hit each other over the head with mallets and stabbing each other with knives and things of that nature. But that's not to say that adults and even children that are old enough and have adult parents that have agreed to allow them to do so aren't able to have enjoyment in those things and to have a difference in right and wrong. And that doesn't just work for cartoons. That talks about pornography. That talks about
video games, anything you want to.
Video games, yeah, definitely. Books.
Moderation.
I mean, all these things go back to the point of if something offends you, don't watch it. Don't have it. Don't turn it on yourself, but don't make it so nobody can turn it on.
Well, and throughout this whole episode, Roger Myers Jr. never once, with his crafty writing group, never once brought up the fact that Marge was letting her baby watch their show. Like and obviously they can't bring that up because that would just kill everything right there. But you're absolutely right.
Plus, The Simpsons thrived on babies watching their show. Let's be real.
But it gets back to what we've been talking about this whole first episode here, which is, like you said, the balance. Where do you draw the line, and what's okay for your kid to watch, and what's not okay? And Marge should have been paying attention to Itchy and Scratchy a long time ago because we've already seen it in little glimpses where we know that the kids are watching the show and that it's not only a show they watch, it's their favorite show on their favorite show. So, I mean, that's something that, as a parent, I would think you would be a little more in tune with and paying attention to. Even if you're drowning it out while you're sitting there watching it, eventually you would see some of it.
Yeah, definitely. It would come in through at least the corner of your eye. You'd see something outrageous and be like, oh my god, turn that off or get the baby out of the room. But yeah. So the episode ends with Homer and Marge going to the museum to visit David for themselves. And Marge is a little bit disappointed just because she's bummed out that basically nobody's there and it's not a popular exhibit. And Homer reassures her by letting her know, don't worry, soon every kid in Springfield will be here. And Marge kind of wondering why until Homer explains because they're going to force them to. And Marge ends by saying, oh, well, that's nice.
Yeah, that's a sweet little silent victory moment. I feel like I enjoyed that. The part I liked was at the end of the second time she was on Dateline, and it's over incredibly fast when they realize Marge is on the same side as them, is when Kent Brockman hints at the next episode, and he says, religion, what is the one true form? One true faith, I mean. Yeah. And that one cracked me up, because it made it sound like they were actually going to answer the question on the next show.
Yeah, that's a fun one. I wish they would. Actually, that would be a fun bonus episode they should have put on the DVD. So, Richie, is there anything that you or that book of yours would like to point out before we move on to our next episode?
They did point out all the signs that are at the protest when Marge and Homer and the kids are first protesting, which we didn't touch on the fact that Bart and Lisa were holding Ban Itchy and Scratchy signs, and Bart, being the little mischievous devil he is, wrote don't in front of it on his, so it said don't ban Itchy and Scratchy. So props to Bart for doing his little bastard kit stuff right there.
Well, and they also both lied to get out of protesting at around 4 o'clock every day so they could go watch Itchy and Scratchy.
That's the silence revolting right there, which I love. One of the signs that I still haven't seen, even though I read this beforehand, that cracks me up is it says, what if they blew up a cat and nobody laughed? And when I read that, it just makes me laugh. Because, yeah, if that happens on the show, so if somebody did that, then there'd be a big uproar. But sorry, PETA people, but that was funny to me. Sorry, not sorry, right?
Sorry, not sorry, for sure.
Screwcast.
Awesome. Well, I think that is going to do it for Itchy and Scratchy and Marge. But we've got another one to talk about, and it's kind of a big deal because there's a very notable first appearance coming up on this one. Bart gets hit by a car, which is the first episode to air in 1991. It premiered on January 10th. The chalkboard scene is I will not sell school property. I don't see why. That seems like a really good way to make a little bit of side money.
Exactly. Especially if the school doesn't know about it.
The couch gag, the family all jumps on the couch, all of the Simpsons pop out onto the floor except for one. Homer remains. He crosses his arms, crosses his legs, and leans back and relaxes with the couch to himself. And we talked about first appearances. There's two of them, one of them being one of the most famous voice actors ever to grace the show. First off, we had Dr. Nick Riviera, who will definitely be making more appearances.
Hi, everybody.
Probably an even bigger deal, we get Lionel Hutz, voiced by none other than Phil Hartman. It's Lionel's first time on the show. It's also Phil's first time on the show, but it definitely will not be his last.
I'm clapping because he was always voicing all my favorite side characters on this show. He even did the voice on the escalator scene where Bart's riding up to heaven. And
do not spit over the side.
Like, oh my god, Phil Hartman just... The show took such a hit when he died, and obviously they recovered very easily. But even me as a child, I knew he was part of SNL, and when he was killed, I literally was like, oh my god, like he's some of my favorite characters on The Simpsons. I don't know what this means.
Yeah, man, it was a dark day for sure. The only other SNL cast member that I can think of that hit me as hard, or if not maybe even a little bit harder, was Chris Farley.
Yeah,
that one really, really ups. I was such a huge Chris Farley fan as a kid, and I was really fat, and people always told me I looked like him. And even though I was sad because I was like, oh, that means I'm fat, I was also really happy because I was like, holy shit, Chris Farley is the bomb. But
you're like, I can do cartwheels and people will laugh.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, or I can, audition to be a dancer. Damn it,
Chippendales dancer.
Chippendales dancer. I was trying to say gigolos, but I knew that was not right. A Chippendales dancer. One other notable first too. It's also the first time on this series that we meet the devil, but again, will not be the last. What's that?
And he's going to be changed because he usually looks like Flanders.
Yeah, it's definitely the character's first time, but he does go through a couple of changes throughout the show. Actually, somewhat interesting on that, the original concept art that they brought had a really scary devil. They actually went the entire opposite way, but at the last minute they decided that it would be better to have a more comedic version of the character.
That's probably a good call.
Yeah, I think that was a big time, real good call. I don't think a big scary devil would have the lasting power, and it would have been more awkward when they brought it back for Flanders down the road.
Well, and the devil had a lot of really funny moments with Bart in this too, so that just plays into that a whole lot more.
For sure. This episode opens up, and it's one of the rare episodes that actually has a title card. It actually has
that threw me off.
Bart gets hit by a car come up across the screen right before Bart gets hit by a car.
But yeah, seeing that, it really threw me off, and I was hoping that when you do your little research, you would have found something that explained why they did that, but I thought maybe it's just completely random.
I didn't actually find any reason as to why they did this. It's just there's a handful of episodes throughout the series that do it, and maybe they're just trying something out. I really don't know what the decision was. Hell, maybe they have it in every episode and they purposely cut that out and they just forgot. Again, yeah. I don't know. I'm speculating.
Maybe when they're going through the reels, they're like, what episode is this?
Yeah, we
have big Harvard degrees, but we can't remember what episode we're on.
Well, shit, dude. To be fair, this episode is season 2, but once they get into the later season, it's like, no, seriously, what season are we in? Because we've been doing this a long time. Are you sure we haven't done this exact same episode already? Because we've done everything. You know that, right?
600 plus episodes, so yeah.
Yeah, that's right. They just rounded 600. You're right. But yeah, so you already talked about it a little bit, but right after Bart gets hit by a car, it goes pretty dark because they basically imply that Bart's dead. His soul leaves his body and he gets on a golden escalator. It starts going up. That seems like a good sign according to the mythology of the Bible. And we get Phil Hartman's voice telling him to hold on to the handrails and basically to behave and not do terrible shit like spit over the side. Bart can't help himself, so he spits a loogie off into a lake and immediately gets sent down the opposite direction. So The Simpsons literally sends a 10-year-old boy to hell. Love television.
Well, I mean, you got to think there's got to be some 10-year-old in the history of the world that didn't go to heaven, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, well, assuming either of these places were to actually exist, then, I mean, you would have to think. But at the same time, maybe there's an age cutoff. I don't know. It seems like a really unfair system.
To be young again.
But yeah, there's a few moments here where Bart is now in hell. He tries to claim innocence, but the devil is like, haha, they all do that. He looks up on his computer, though, and it turns out Bart isn't supposed to be here until Bart isn't supposed to be here until the Yankees win the pennant again, which, for what it's worth, in real life happened a decade later.
Was it that long? I thought they won a couple times in the 90s.
According to IMDb, it was a decade after this show aired that the Yankees won their next pennant.
Fair enough. It's still a really funny moment because it was written, the Yankees win the pennant all the time. I'm not a Yankees fan. I'm a Rangers fan, so it sucks. But, yeah, the Yankees win left and right, so that's the...
But have they always done that, or is that more of a recent
The Yankees
thing?
have the most ever, so yeah, they win all the time.
Sure, no, I get that, but I mean, they could have the most ever just in like the last 15 years, because I don't watch a lot of baseball, and I didn't watch any back then, but at this point, I'm thinking since 2000 is about when the Yankees like blew up, right?
They've won a few times since then. Jeter won a couple. A-Rod.
No, I mean blew up in a good way.
Oh.
Like between like 2000 and now, it seems like they win at least like every other year or something like that. Not the last few years, to be fair. It was the Giants, I believe, that have been winning every other year recently.
Yeah, until this year. They usually win even years, so they already have lost this year. But no, man, the Yankees, I think, have like 27 championships, something like that.
Interesting. Well, hey, maybe I misread, but I on IMDb, I'm pretty confident I saw that it was one decade after.
No, I'm sure that's right. I'm sure that's right. I'm
episode.
saying before that, though. I mean, they won in the 50s a lot, I believe.
Gotcha.
Yeah, they've been around so long. But they've also had a lot of good teams over the years. I think my dad said ABC used to actually own the Yankees partially because when he was a kid in Colorado, the Yankees were the only team that were on TV. So nationally, everybody liked the Yankees because they were the team they were seeing every week.
Because they could watch them anywhere. Sure, that makes sense. But yeah, so it turns out there was a clerical error. Bart was there prematurely, and they let him go. On the way out, Bart asked the devil, hey man, is there anything I can do to avoid coming back here? The devil's like, oh, of course there is, but you're not going to like it. And then Bart's just like, oh, okay then.
I love that absolute moment. It's one we were talking about just a little while ago where it's the delivery and the way that it's all said, where it's just like, to both of them, the devil and Bart, the way they talk, it's like, oh, it's no big deal, so whatever, screw it.
They're very casual with each other. Like, they're very familiar friends, it seems.
It's like Bart knows he's not going to try, and the devil knows it's pointless to tell him.
So Bart wakes up in the hospital, and there's a Wizard of Oz parody moment where I was in hell, and you were there, and you were there. And then he looks at Lionel Hutz, and he's like, who the hell are you? And that pretty much introduces one of the greatest characters ever on The Simpsons, Lionel Hutz, the defense attorney, ambulance chaser, and voiced by one of the most talented comedians of all time.
I don't think we've referenced this guy yet this episode, so we should probably say his name.
Have we not said Phil Hartman?
I'm just kidding. We talked. Fuck you.
So yeah, Lionel Hutz.
Dr. Lawyer Lionel Hutz.
Dr. Lawyer Lionel Hutz. So Lionel Hutz introduces himself as the lawyer. He leaves him with a card, which also doubles as a sponge if you get it wet. And he leaves the Simpsons to go back home and take care of Bart. We get a scene where Homer's at work the next day talking with all the guys, and he's saying things like, if I wasn't so spineless, I'd march into Burns' office right now. And at that moment, Smithers comes out and says, Simpson, Mr. Burns wants you to march into his office right now. They get to discussing the incident that they hit Bart with a car, and Monty Burns offers Simpsons $100, which Simpson starts sweating, and he's really nervous, but he basically tells Burns that the hospital bills alone were way more than $100. Burns gets pissed. He thinks he's ungrateful. He takes the offer off the table and sends him out of his office. Homer's sweating bullets. He grabs the only thing he has in his hand or in his pocket to wipe the sweat. Turns out to be Lionel Hutz's card, and it pops up into a sponge with his information clearly written on it.
Then we get that sweet little line from Mr. Burns, and he has a lot of moments like this over the years when Burns gets mad at Homer and he says, "I'll crush you like a paper cup," and he can't crush the little tiny paper cup in his hand. He does that. He does that one where he's like, "I'll crush you like an ant," and then the ant topples him over off the ground. I love those moments.
I remember that too. Yeah, those are good. Those are good. Such a feeble old man. We do get a scene that Homer actually goes to meet with Lionel Hutz in his office. I love when they first sit down. You hear an ambulance siren, and Hutz basically kind of like pops up just a little bit, like he's ready to go running, and then he's like, "Oh well," and he sits back down to talk to Homer.
And then we get to the part where he tells Homer like what his fee is to take on Bart's case, and I love that scene because he's gonna rape the Simpsons so bad. He says that his fee is 50% of the settlement. Which, let's be honest, that's terrible. That's awful. Well, I think isn't it supposed to be like 10% or something like that if you win? I don't know if you know that or not, but
I've never actually sued anybody. I couldn't tell you it was fair, but 50% seems steep. I mean, definitely.
Well, then he also says when Homer's hesitant, he goes, "I also have this beautiful faux pas necklace," and it's like this pearl necklace, which, if you don't know what that means, it means fake. But yeah, that made me really laugh because that seemed to kind of nudge Homer in the right direction there.
Well, it's a $99 value, dude.
Faux pas $99. Beautiful. We used to sell those all the time.
Yeah, we sure did.
Fun fact, MrMostDaysOff and the WIzKid used to work in a jewelry store.
Yeah, those were some miserable fucking days. Actually, when you and I worked together, it was the dopest because we worked in the shittiest of Gordons, and we just fucking played PlayStation in the back room all the time because we barely had customers to deal with. That was
on
dope.
Sundays, we would literally play Madden on this little crappy TV on our PlayStation 2 from
It was supposed to be for training videos, but it had the right connection so we could hook the PS2 up to it.
Literally got mad at customers when they came in to stop us from playing, but we always made our sales goal. There were times people were like, "Man, you guys had a really good day," and we're like, "Yeah, it sucked."
Yeah, we worked really hard. We went after every customer and took every opportunity.
And we were playing Madden. We almost got caught one time too. That was fantastic. That's one of my proudest moments, man. You were quick-witted on that one.
I just remember our general manager walked in, and I think was I talking to him, and you were stuffing shit in the
No.
the
I
safe?
went out. I went out and cut him off,
around?
asking him about the weather.
That's what
and
it
shit
was.
like
Yeah,
that.
I was stuffing shit in the safe.
And you opened the safe and threw everything in there.
I didn't throw it. It was a PlayStation. Yeah. That was our fucking that was our favorite thing. So I was like quickly but gently like stacking it into the safe, like trying to get it out of sight.
Well, and also you left the TV out because you had actually been part of a training video filming for the store. So we said that you were showing me the tape, and we were going over what was on the tape.
Which I don't even think the tape was in the VCR.
I don't think it was. But it worked out beautifully.
Yeah, good stuff, good stuff. Anyway, back to The Simpsons. We meet another famous character, Dr. Nick Riviera, and he has a little bit of a different opinion about Bart's condition than Dr. Hibbert did. But first, one of the best things when you walk into the office for the first time, it has a whole wall full of diplomas, and one of them says, "I went to medical school, and all I got was this lousy diploma."
Oh, good old Riviera.
So they basically are coaching Bart that he's injured, and they're actually going over like how to they're like wrapping him up in all sorts of bandages and stuff, and Bart actually starts to get a little worried, and he's like, "Hey, will I ever play baseball again?" And Homer starts crying and is like, "No, you won't." And Bart says, "But I played baseball this morning."
And right before that he says, "Am I gonna die?" And Homer goes, "Yes."
Yeah.
One thing we didn't bring up is when Dr. Nick Riviera introduced himself, he came in with an x-ray of Bart's head. And he says, "This smudge here that looks like my fingerprint is actually trauma." I love that part. Just delivered with the deadpan of Dr. Nick Riviera.
Yeah, I think the dark spot around the neck was whiplash. Yeah, there's a couple of things where it's just like, that's just a normal looking x-ray, dude. So this is actually where the main conflict of the episode stems, and that is that Marge and Lisa are very quickly becoming uncomfortable with this whole situation because it seems an awful lot like lying. And there's a great moment where Lionel Hutz basically says to Marge, you're not a doctor. I'm not a doctor. The only person in this room that even comes close to being a doctor is that man over there, pointing at Dr. Nick. I really enjoy Lionel Hutz a lot.
Absolutely.
He's got a lot of really great moments. There's actually another line we kind of missed over it earlier, but I wanted to go back and point it out just because there's so few of them. When Lisa first meets Lionel Hutz, she actually straight up asks him if he's a shyster. And he just dodges the question by like chuckling and being like, how does a cute little girl like you know such a fancy word and that type of stuff. But Lisa actually only has 3 lines in this entire episode.
Wow.
And that's one of them. And I think that one of them might include the double groan that we'll get to here in a bit. But yeah, only 3 lines by Lisa. So I mean, to be fair, that she's present in a lot of the scenes, but I just thought it was interesting to point out.
Maybe a lot of it got cut, or maybe they couldn't borrow Miss Yeardley Smith. Is that Yeardley Smith? I always forget who does Lisa.
I think it was just more so than anything that they didn't really have time for her because there was so much going on with Bart and Lionel and Homer. I mean, there's a lot of things happening in this episode that I can understand why
really
her part in this just really wasn't that important. So Lionel Hutz and Dr. Nick are doing a little bit of coaching. They go back in Bart's living room, and they're actually coaching Bart to answer questions, and Lionel Hutz is happy. He's like, the kid's a pro. They get to the courtroom itself.
Before the trial starts, Burns' lawyer stands up and he says, my client wants to remind you how rich and powerful he is. And then Burns immediately yells, I should be able to run over as many kids as I want.
I mean, he is really rich. He seems like he has run over kid rich money. But the problem is, if you're that rich, you've got to be willing to give it away. And that's the thing that he's not into. He's like, I want to run over kids, but then I don't want to pay up.
Well, at the beginning of the episode, when he hits Bart, he says something like, give him a nickel and let's be on our way. So the way he says it is like, well, he's probably done it before.
Yeah, true. And yeah, I think Smithers is like, I think we should call it doctors there. I love when they get Bart on stand and the judge is basically asking Bart, like, well, son, do you know the difference between the truth and between telling a lie? And Bart's just like, maybe.
I like it because the judge then says, you wouldn't lie to the U.S., would you? And Bart actually looks at Hutz and Homer, and they were going, no.
Yeah, they're doing like, no, and shaking their heads.
Like, Bart legitimately doesn't know how to answer the question.
So Bart tells his account of what happened on that fateful day, and it was this really awesome dark version. My favorite thing is it has like an evil version of Burns driving, but the hood ornament on his car is actually a crosshair, and he's like got Bart in his sights like he's hunting him down, trying to get at him, and Bart is fleeing. It's this really awesome dark vision that Bart has that I really enjoyed.
I feel like this episode overall takes a dark tone at the end. Like
it kind of does, yeah.
I'm gonna say, like, plan off your dark thing. I know we still got the lighter side of Burns here to go over, but after that, at the end of the episode, it takes kind of a dark turn.
It does take a little bit of a dark turn. Right after this dark account, Lionel Hutz actually says, now that's believable testimony, to which Marge and Lisa both together look at each other and do Marge's groan. It's in the genes.
The double groan.
The double groan indeed.
And then I think we get to the point where Burns realizes that he's going to have to offer some kind of settlement, and that's the only way he's going to get off without having to pay the $1 million.
Yeah, so he's talking about this with his lawyers, and Burns is like, what do you mean they hate me? What trial were you watching?
Was that Trump-esque there?
So Burns does invite the Simpson family over to have dinner and discuss a settlement, or to have drinks, I think it was, and discuss a settlement. But Homer straight up asks Burns, are you trying to get me drunk? And Burns straight up tells him, yes. They get a very, very generous settlement offer of $500,000, which is the most frustrating thing about this episode, because they decide to talk about it for a minute, and the thing is, there's nothing to talk about. Lionel Hutz promised $1 million, but he was going to take half of it. Burns is straight up offering $500,000. He'd probably still take half of it, though. Maybe that's the issue.
Yeah. Well, the issue is that Homer knows that they're all lying and that Bart's perfectly fine. That's the issue here, and that's the greed impact in this episode, and also the morality point is they could have gotten away with lying and gotten $500,000, but Homer gets greedy.
Yep.
And, well, before this, when Burns is yelling at his lawyers, Homer's right outside of earshot of the room, and he can hear everything they're saying. And we have another Homer's a monkey moment where Burns is yelling at his lawyers, "I'll buy him off with a couple bananas." And Homer's literally hearing him say that about him, and he just got this dumbfounded look on his face.
Yeah. Unfortunately, while Marge and Homer are discussing this settlement, Burns and Smithers are spying, and Marge says the word phony doctor while she's listing all of the grievances that she wished that they didn't have to deal with throughout this whole ordeal. And she actually proclaims that she would be more than happy to settle for the cost of the doctor's bills and an apology. And at that point, Mr. Burns snatches the offer out of their hands and says, "You won't even get that. This offer has expired. Basically, I'll see you back in court."
So Marge screws Homer over in his mind, but for all of us regular fans, she's more about the morality thing here. She's trying to save her husband's soul.
She is doing her best. She actually gets called on the stand the next day, and when she's having to take her oath, there's a great line again by Lionel Hutz where after she, swears to tell the truth, and Lionel Hutz leans over to Homer and says, "She's taking that really seriously." So then Marge says something along the lines when she's being asked about all of the characters that she's had to deal with, including Dr. Nick Riviera, which they thought was out of character of her to go, instead of to their love doctor, Dr. Hibbert, to go to this new doctor for whatever reason. And when asked about him, she said that she was taught that if you can't say anything nice, that you shouldn't say anything at all. Homer leans over to Lionel Hutz and is like, "Will that work?" And Lionel Hutz is like, "No, I've tried that before."
Will that hold up in court?
Yeah, that's what it was.
It's another great Hutz moment right there.
We get another meeting between Mr. Burns and the Simpsons with Lionel Hutz this time. It's a little bit smaller offer. It's actually a big goose egg. Monty Burns offers the Simpsons nothing as a settlement, and Lionel Hutz still leans over and is like, "I think we should take it."
Nothing from nothing, still nothing, so you don't owe Hutz jack.
Well, this is where the episode gets dark, as Richie talked about a little bit earlier, and it actually gets really dark. They're at dinner, and Marge has made Homer's favorite. It's the pork chops that we get from the beginning of the episode. Everything's hunky-dory, but Homer is saying nice things, but we're actually hearing his inner monologue, and he is downright depressed. He's upset. He's looking at Marge, talking about how she's the woman that cost him $1 million. He really can barely bring himself to even function at this table. He asks if he can go to Moe's for a drink, and there's a pretty smart moment here where Marge agrees, but then we see, for just a moment, we hear her inner monologue, and she starts thinking to herself that her women's intuition is identifying a problem, and you can tell she knows something is wrong.
Which, to be fair, again, I was talking about this earlier. Marge saved her entire family's soul, metaphorically speaking, by being truthful and not letting him get this $1 million. The $1 million is a representation of her family selling out, which somebody like you and I might be okay with that for $1 million, even though it's only $500,000. But not lying in court. I want to specify that right now. Not the lying in court part. However, she saved her family's soul, but the question is, at what cost did she actually do that? Homer's a petty person. Homer doesn't think long term. All Homer sees is that he had $1 million in the bag, and Marge could not tell one little lie to ensure that they got it. And actually, she didn't even have to lie. All she had to do was lie by omission, by not going up on the stand, by not saying that at Burns' house. So
plead the fifth.
It was basically in the bag, and Marge completely.
I don't think you can plead the fifth during a civil lawsuit, for what it's worth, though.
Yeah, but if they wouldn't have had that,
if
they wouldn't have had that conversation in Burns' house, then Burns would have never found out.
Totally. You're absolutely right. I really love when they get to the bar. Homer's having a beer, and just like the old-fashioned bartender, you're telling your woes and whatnot, and Moe basically tells Homer, you're better off for it. Rich people ain't happy. They may think they're happy from the day they're born to the day they die, but trust me, they ain't happy.
Good old Moe. Always good for a pick-me-up speech.
But yeah, this is where The Simpsons gets sweet again. It's still dark, don't get me wrong, but it just gets into the heart and the strength of the relationship between Homer and Marge. Marge shows up at the bar, and at least to this motley crew, Marge is a fucking fox, because they are going crazy over her.
Did you notice Moe's was unusually busy that night?
And it wasn't even ladies' night. And we get a really, really kind of sad scene where Homer tells Marge that he's not sure that he loves her anymore, which I'm thinking, like, you fucking idiot, dude. Marge is a down-ass bitch, you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I know what you are saying. But no, this scene, I think it's just like you touched on a little while ago. Homer is depressed because he knows what could have been, what should have been. But again, as we've seen this theme a few times in The Simpsons, he's not being respectful of what he already has. On top of that, he still has a fucking job, which I know that they said it would look bad if he fired somebody after he hit their son. Burns has, I think, all the legal recourse he wants to fire Homer at this point. But he's probably already forgotten who Homer is by the end of that day.
Yeah, he probably accidentally fired the wrong person, getting him confused with Homer.
Samson!
Marge convinces Homer to look her in the eyes, and of course Homer instantly realizes that he does love Marge and that he was just talking crazy. Still seemed like a really odd just situation between the two of them. Felt really weird, but they do reconcile, and everyone's so happy. Moe's even happy enough that he offers a third off of all pitchers for the next 15 minutes. Of course, that's one per customer, domestics only, and no sharing.
What I liked is that I actually like the way they do this part where she says, if you don't love me, I need you to look me in the eyes and tell me right now. And Homer does the thing where he actually starts at her feet and slowly looks up at her eyes. And I love when he takes another drink of beer and he says, I'll always love you. But I actually like the moment because he's angry, he's doubting himself, he's been saying he's not sure if he loves her anymore. And when he gets up to her face and looks at her eyes, as soon as he looks at her eyes, he basically knows, I'm full of shit. I can't believe I was talking like this. Like, it's instantly there when he looks her in the eyes. And it's one of the sweet moments. They had to wrap it up. They're running low on time at this point. But you feel like it's really, really dark. But in that moment, when you see and hear Homer's thoughts, it's like, well, there was never really a doubt about this. He just has to come to terms
that Marge is $1 million woman.
Exactly. But, and that his morality is safe. If his morality wasn't saved by Marge in an earlier scene, he probably would have stopped loving her. Like, I know that's going down the road and it's stretching it, but I think it's something that mirrors what happened in the previous scene. Because Marge saved Homer's soul, so to speak, she also saved her marriage long term. Whereas if he would have gotten away with it, what kind of person would he turn into? How far would he take it, sort of thing? At least that's the way I view it.
Right on. All right, man. Is there anything else that you or that book of yours would like to say about Bart gets hit by a car?
I was going over this. Oh, yeah, that's the one I want to bring up. The Devil's Desktop is equipped with a Windows-based program. I thought that was pretty funny, actually.
Awesome, man. Well, that's going to do it for this week's Best Darn Diddly Review Show. Is there anything that you'd like to plug before we get out of here, Rich?
As usual, you can always follow me on Twitter. I'm at TheWiz_Kid23.
I am also on Twitter at MrMostDaysOff. Also come over and check me out on VoicesOfWrestling.com, where I do a weekly review of Lucha Underground called Lucha of the Hidden Temple with my good buddy Chris Novembrino. It's a good time, and we have some Nickelodeon references in there for you old school 90s Nick fans. Other than that, we look forward to seeing you next week on the Best Darn Diddly Review Show, when we're going to review One Fish, Two Fish, Blowfish, Bluefish, and I believe our first flashback episode, The Way We Was. We'll see you next week.